This occurred during the bushfires we experienced in Australia a few years ago. I am a firefighter and have been in this profession for a significant 20 years now. I have been a part of numerous bushfires, but the one we had at that time was unique, entirely unlike anything I had faced before. There exists an unwritten rule among us firefighters. When you are out there fighting a blaze that could swallow you whole, you do not question the fire. You respect it, you fight it, but you never question it. But what I saw that day, it got me asking some things I never thought I would. Our job is quite simple. When a fire breaks out, we react, evaluate the circumstance, create a strategy, and then begin fighting the fire. It's a physically intense job and needs nerves of steel, but it's what we committed to, and we wouldn't want it any differently. This specific bushfire started up north, near Queensland, and expanded downwards across New South Wales like a furious creature. We were responding to those fires for days on end with little to no sleep. It was insane. You could see the fire and smoke from miles away. The whole sky in some areas was just orange. The heat was unbearable, and the roar of a bushfire like that is something that stays with you. My team and I were tasked with preventing the blaze from reaching a small town to the south. We had used everything in our arsenal: water bombs, controlled backburns, fire breaks, you name it. But despite our best efforts, the fire seemed relentless, consuming everything in its path. Over the course of weeks, we started noticing something peculiar. There was this patch of eucalyptus forest just east of the town we were trying to save. It was dense, full of dried-up leaves, a perfect fuel for a fire. But here's the strange part. Despite the raging fire closing in from all directions, this particular patch remained untouched. Fires are unpredictable, but they do follow some basic logic. This was not logical at all. It was as if the flames were intentionally avoiding this area, like they were scared of it or something. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what we were observing at the location. Was it some kind of novel species of fire-retardant eucalyptus? Could it possibly be some bizarre microclimate in that area? We simply didn't have an answer. But what we knew was that we might use this to our advantage. If we could somehow figure out why the fire wasn't touching that area, maybe we could replicate it and save the town. As I was pondering this unusual puzzle, my thoughts were interrupted as the radio crackled to life. Another spot fire was detected, and we scrambled to respond. We hopped into our trucks and drove off, leaving the mystery of the untouched patch for another time. But mate, I couldn't get it out of my head. It was probably the sleep deprivation talking, but I had the strange gut feeling that something about that patch of land was off. It wasn't just the way the fire avoided it, but there was this chill in the air too, this strange silence that hung over it. It made my skin crawl. It felt like there were eyes on us, watching from unseen corners of the fire. As we raced towards the new hotspot, I looked back over my shoulder. Through the billowing smoke and dancing flames, the leafy, untouched patch stood ominously and silently, much like a stoic mystery begging to be solved. Out of nowhere, I heard a strange sound. It was not the crackling of burning leaves or the shifting of tired old gum trees. It was something different. Against the infernal symphony of the bushfire, I heard a faint yet distinct clicking. It sounded nearly mechanical in nature. I experienced a gnawing sensation, a sinking notion that something was not correct. Something was truly wicked about that patch of bushland. After hours of battling the unforgiving fire, we were successful in extinguishing the spot fire and began our journey back to the station when I made the decision to do something insanely unwise, something entirely against protocol. But that strange patch of land, it was bothering me. I had to investigate further. Feeling like an absolute nuttier, I decided to have a go at it. Told my friends something about needing a pee and wandered off into that creepy patch of land. The second I stepped in, everything seemed to become silent. The harsh crackling of the flames went silent, as if I'd wandered into another world. Then, crystal clear, I heard that clicking sound. Not mechanical, definitely unnatural, as if some creature was making it. But everything with any sense had already fled the fires. As I ventured further in, my heart pounding, I came across the source of the noises, and let me tell you, it was no creature from the nature documentaries. Nestled in a small clearing was this thing. It was some kind of a bloody, pale nightmare, naked and gaunt like a ghoul. It was crawling on all fours, almost human-like, but so inconsistent that my mind recoiled in terror. Its head turned towards me, and then I saw its hollow black eyes and a nearly faceless visage. The clicking sound was emerging from its black and gaping mouth. I stood there, immobilized as the creature's head rotated back to the blazing fire outlining the patch. And I do not know how to explain this, but it was like it was actually controlling those flames, guiding them away from its domain. I wish I could tell you that I charged in, wrestling the creature or heroically attempting a capture, but truth be told, I was petrified. I backed away, my entire body trembling as the entity continued its melancholy clicking. I stumbled out of that open space and hurried back to my team. I couldn't believe what I had witnessed out there. My heart thumped in my chest like a drum. When I looked back, that patch remained there, untouched as ever. Its single resident, possibly the weirdest and most terrifying encounter of my life. In the days that followed, we managed to control the fire, and the town was saved. That area, though, remained a mystery. No one believed me, and I did not quite believe myself. Had I hallucinated from the intense heat and exhaustion, or was there truly something out there alone in the flames? I have tossed and turned it in my mind over and over. Every time I crawl into bed, every time I close my eyes, I see those hollow black pits staring back at me. The image of it, sitting in that eerie silence amidst an all-consuming fire, was something I could never unsee. And the sound of that clicking, it's like it's been burned into me. In the end, I don't know what to believe. But I do know one thing. There are strange and improbable things out there. Not long ago, I was able to mark off a significant item on my bucket list: scuba diving off the coast of Scotland. The rocky coastline houses some of the main diving spots in the world. I have always been captivated by underwater exploration. The deep blue darkness, the enigmatic shadows, fish dashing around as if they are engaged in a game of hide and seek, and if you are fortunate, the excitement of discovering something akin to a lost artifact or submerged treasure. On this particular journey, it was a gentle summer day when we started from the local marina. Dressed in my diving equipment, I followed the guide into the water. His name was Ian. He was local to the area and had been leading guided dives for years. As we slipped into the temperate waters, I could not help but feel a childlike sense of excitement. That is what diving does to me. Each time feels like the first. The adrenaline rush when you dive deeper, it never gets old. Not for me. The waters off the coast of Scotland aren't the crystal clear tropical kind you see on all the internet videos. They are darker here, more enigmatic. The visibility depends entirely on the sun and the currents. Though it was a challenge, I was eager to explore and unravel the secrets I felt were waiting for me below. About half an hour into the dive, following a trail left by a myriad of local sea critters, I stumbled upon what looked like an ancient underwater cave. It was half hidden by a thick growth of seaweed. This spot was not on Ian's usual route. I could see by his surprised expression that he too was unaware of its existence. But there's no thrill without a bit of risk. So, taking a moment to check our gear, we ventured in. Inside, the walls of the cave were speckled with marine life. These tiny creatures had created a whole microcosm, separate from the world outside. Our flashlights slid across the cave floor and revealed a variety of brilliant objects shimmering in the darkness. My heart jumped in my chest as I recognized what these objects were. Sunken treasures, ancient coins blanketed by barnacles, jewel-encrusted goblets, pearls. There was even what looked like a royal crest, half buried under the silt. I couldn't believe what we had found. And then, out of nowhere, I felt a sudden shift in the water. I looked at Ian. His face was masked by poor visibility, but I could still sense an unease in him. His headlamp darted wildly through the water, illuminating bursts of sand and sudden showers of tiny bubbles. Something else was there with us, something that belonged to the underwater cave. There was something living in here. I heard a low rumble grip the water around us. It was then that a sense of dread hit me. I cannot explain what caused it, but I just knew we had to get out of there. And as we quickly started our withdrawal, I observed something there in the water. At first, it was just a swiftly moving shadow, but it was substantially larger than a fish or any sea creature I had ever seen. It was just at the periphery of my sight, out of our torchlight's range. The enigmatic low sound increased in strength, reverberating in the silent water. I caught a fleeting glimpse of something. It was not a fish or shark or turtle or any sea creature I had ever encountered before. I saw the shadow flicker again, this time in the entrance of the cave. A thwack, similar to the sound of a whip cutting the air, echoed around me, creating disorienting ripples in the water. I risked stealing a glance back towards the cave, only for my blood to turn ice cold. What I saw there defies all sanity and rationality. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was all just a bad dream, but I know what I saw down there, and I know it was real. Looking back at me from the dark abyss of the cave were two enormous glowing orbs. These weren't bioluminescent fish, no, these were eyes. Eyes as large as dinner plates and filled with a threatening hypnotic light that appeared to pulsate in the unclear water. It seemed like they were attempting to draw you in. The creature moved further into the light. I could not believe what I saw before me in the entrance of that cave. There were rows upon rows of sharp, oversized teeth that reflected pure white against our lights. The creature had a long, scaled, sinuous body that wrapped around itself like a snake. It appeared to have some type of gills or fins on either side of its face, almost like a dragon out of a storybook. It was entirely too large to be anything known to inhabit these waters. This thing was big enough to sink a boat without much of a struggle at all. Suddenly, all those stories I had heard about sea monsters didn't seem so far-fetched anymore, but the only thought in my mind right then was to get the hell out of there. Ian must have had the same thought, because we propelled through the water like crazies, only glancing backward to confirm the creature was not in pursuit. Each water disturbance, every noise was magnified by the complete quiet of the marine environment, and every tiny fish altering its course in the darkness appeared as if the monster was hunting us. We broke the water's surface, panting for breath. The boat was in close proximity, and we scrambled aboard in hurried fashion. Both of us were trembling. The shock and fear we felt was crystal clear in our eyes. Ian revved the engine, and we pulled away from that wretched spot, leaving the treasures and the horror of that creature far behind. Later, wrapped in warm blankets, sipping on strong coffee, Ian and I shared strained smiles. We had escaped the grip of a true sea monster, a being whose existence will be doubted and ridiculed by the skeptics, yet ignorance appears as joy compared to the recollections of those horrifying eyes I witnessed in the cave that day. I still engage in diving. I couldn't completely abandon it, but I now stick to crowded locations and clearer waters. The Sea of Scotland conceals its mysteries tightly, but I anticipate the truth will come to light eventually. It happened approximately 6 months ago, during a weekend getaway to the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I had rented a modest rustic cabin right in the middle of the mountains. If you've never visited the area, the mountains of Tennessee are a little different than the ones out west. The woods in this region are extremely dense, that seeing even 5 feet ahead of you becomes a challenge. I love the isolation, but it was a little eerie sometimes. People get lost a lot out here. It's the kind of place you step off the trail for a moment, and then suddenly you get turned around and can't find it again. I made a point to get myself a good map and stay on the marked trails. In that way, I would be safe. I have never been so wrong in all my life. The first day at my cabin was calm and rejuvenating. Completely as expected. I hiked up one of the nearby trails and was rewarded with panoramic views that stretched out as far as the eyes could see. You could see everything from up there. It was a sea of trees beneath me. The cabin itself had a warm, lived-in feel with a rustic sense of decor. A little laminated pamphlet was present providing information about the historic cabin and how it was preserved and refurbished over the years. The booklet mentioned it was constructed several years before the Civil War. The first day was everything I had hoped for, but as night fell, the peaceful feeling soon gave way to a sense of uncomfortable eeriness. The cabin creaked and sighed in the night as the harsh mountain winds picked up. All normal sounds for an old house, but I suddenly became very aware of how alone I was out there. Shadows of trees danced across my cabin walls in the moonlight. It took a while to drift off to sleep that night. I had the sensation that something unnatural was happening, but I didn't possess any evidence to support my emotions. I persuaded myself that I was merely exhausted and my mind was tricking me, and that was the end of it. On the second day, I went for a hike in a different direction. As soon as I entered the woods, everything appeared correct in the world. The sounds of nature surrounding me were more revitalizing than my sleep the previous night. I finally felt at ease. I recall returning to the cabin that evening, and just as soon as I walked through the door, that uneasy feeling of dread slithered back in. That night I tossed and turned for what felt like hours before I was finally able to fall asleep. Something just felt wrong and I couldn't shake it, and I was about to find out why. Not 20 minutes later, I woke to the sound of jingling chains and inaudible whispers. I knew right then that it was not just the wind playing tricks on me. I hesitantly rose from the bed. Thinking there was an intruder, I grabbed my pocket knife off the nightstand. Within the dim moonlight seeping inside from the curtained windows, I caught sight of a translucent figure. It was an old man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with a heavy chain linked around his faded blue uniform that rattled every time he moved. Then another figure appeared. This one was a young boy. He was maybe 10 or 12 years old, but his eyes were much older. He had that 1,000-yard stare you see with veterans coming back from war zones. More figures emerged from that same corner of the house, almost like there was an unseen portal there. There was probably 8 of them in total, and they all bore those old war uniforms. Despite their haunting appearance, I do not think they meant me any harm. They just seemed lost. It was like they were stuck there, unable to move on. My initial fear turned to sadness. Suddenly, one of them looked directly at me, his hollow eyes meeting mine. I could feel the chill running down my spine as he slowly reached out to me. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, and suddenly they were gone. All of them. The sudden quiet felt unnerving, and I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I ended up packing my things and leaving the following morning. I felt a bit ashamed when I left. I have booked myself a return trip to the cabin in about 4 months. Now, I am not a priest or a shaman or anything like that, but I believe I can help those ghosts move on as long as I stay open-minded. Three weeks earlier, I made the decision to embark on a lone backpacking journey into the core of the Adirondack wilderness. I avoided the trails as my intention was to connect more profoundly with nature. The intended journey was for healing. That's what my therapist suggested I undertake. I'd wager he wouldn't believe what I'm going to disclose in our upcoming session. However, I'm certain about what I witnessed, and it didn't belong to this world. I planned to backpack into the wilderness of the High Peaks region. I waited until after the close of deer season to avoid any hunters potentially mistaking me for a deer. Since the season ends around the second week of December, I knew I needed to be prepared for the cold winter and snow. I would bring along a sled to help bring in all my supplies, such as a hot tent, stove, and other supplies. I parked at a public parking lot with a note indicating where I would be in case of an emergency. From there, I made the challenging journey into the heart of the wilderness. Progress was slowed by downed trees that seemed to grab at my sled at every turn. However, I strived forward. I halted a couple of hours prior to sunset to establish camp and chop some firewood for the night. I knew I needed to go further in so I could unwind. I made a cup of hot chocolate while I stared at the clear sky. The beautiful aspect of the wilderness is you do not have to deal with light pollution. You get to see all of the stars in their glory. Now and then you see planes in the sky, but for the most part the night sky is untouched by man. The following day I traveled further into the wild. Once I found a suitable location to camp at for the next few days, I quickly went to work getting everything ready. Within 2 hours, I had enough wood to last a few days. Then I began to relax as the sun finally started to set. Approximately 30 minutes later, something appeared strange. I spotted a light that I thought must be a jet or airplane. It appeared normal initially, but then its direction began to change every few seconds. Then it came to a complete stop in midair before going in reverse. This was incredibly odd because I knew that this was no ordinary plane. Maybe it was some sort of new prototype being tested by the Air Force. This lasted for about 10 minutes. Afterward, I went to bed, which was the end of that night. The third day was freezing, so I stayed in camp most of the day. I read a little bit here and there. Mainly, I maintained the fire in the stove and took naps. I had a late meal and chose to end the night early. Around midnight, I was roused by a brilliant light. I was so disoriented that I didn't know how to process it. At first, I believed someone was casting a spotlight onto my tent. Then I comprehended that the light was originating from above rather than from the ground. Then my thoughts began to run fast. My only reasoning was a helicopter must have discovered me and decided to utilize me as a practice dummy. When I unzipped the tent to look outside, the light was instantly gone, and it was completely quiet. There was something strange about the light, too. It appeared to pulsate with varying shades of light. It nearly seemed alive. I decided that I would start heading out at the first light. I knew I had another night of camping before I could make it out of here, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever I dealt with last night. I skipped lunch to cover more miles before I had to set up the camp, and I hiked a good distance. I enjoyed my dinner before I went to bed. Near midnight, it happened again. I heard a metallic hum that grew louder as the light beam intensified. I was so scared by what was happening, I did not even worry about my boots as I quickly unzipped the tent. Maybe 100 feet above me was a circular object that emitted light in its center. Other lights emitted from the sides danced across the surrounding area and constantly changed colors. There seemed to be a glass window through which I could see the silhouette of two individuals, except I'm not sure if they were human. They were tall and slender, but there was something about the shape of their heads. In a matter of seconds, it had vanished into the night sky. I promptly packed up the camp and traced my earlier path out of the forest in the darkness. Exhausted and still panicked, I reached the parking area. I am afraid this is not the last I will see of that aircraft, which scares me the most. I firmly stand by what I experienced that day back in May 1999. During this time, I was looking around scouting areas for the best turkey hunting. There is a specific area in the mountain range around me where I know lots of wild turkeys like to congregate and come together. But to get there, you have to go through a lot of thick brush and timber. There is an old logging road that will take you a few miles up, and then from there, it's about another 3 miles on foot, all through thick, dense forest. Not a problem since I'm pretty much raised and born in the woods. But on this day, on my way to that spot in question, I was attacked by some upright canine walking on its 2 hind legs, and I'm still not exactly sure what it was. Luckily for me, I came out unharmed as I did not allow it to get close enough to do any real damage. I shot off a lot of rounds, but I think I only scared it off because it retreated and sounded like more were following after me. So part of me thinks that it was an ambush or some sort of trap. Like they knew I was there and they were getting ready, calculating the perfect time to ambush me and take me down. I cannot prove that theory, but from the noises that I heard after this thing took off, there were more of them around me, surrounding me, and coming towards me. That was more than enough proof in my mind that I needed to get out of there and leave. In addition to the fact that I was recently assaulted by a mysterious dog, I am uncertain about its origins or its identity, and I have never seen it before in my life. But since this happened to me, I feel like my mind and the possibilities have been opened a little more. After I got out of my truck, I was parked in this old logging road. And remember, I am out here in the middle of nowhere. There is not a soul around for at least 10 miles. I can remember some of these details very well because the entire account stands so strong in my brain. I want to say, I probably was not even 200 yards of the trail from my truck when the entire woods around me went deathly silent. Now that only means one thing. There is a large predator in the area, and all the wildlife knows it. That means no birds, no squirrels chirping and chatting. That is what I expected, which is precisely why I had a firearm on me. My thoughts at the time were a mountain lion, and mountain lions can indeed attack people. This is particularly true given the right circumstances of them being hungry and you being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while it was not exactly a mountain lion, it was something much, much worse. I still refused to lie down and die that day. I was determined to stand my ground even if I was faced with a giant. My position on the trail was on a very gentle slope. The slope likely started right at the base of the road where my truck was parked. You traverse the logging road and you come across a very subtle slope that probably extends for 500 to 600 yards, leading up to the peak of a ridge. Then it's a very gradual decline, and then flattens out after a while. You take this for about another couple miles, and it drops down again into almost a little valley, if you want to call it that. It's a very large clearing with a small little creek, and if you follow it, which I have done before, it feeds into a larger river that runs through the entire area. So when the woods around me became deathly silent, it was instantly noticeable. I was still able to turn around from my position and clearly see my truck, and also turn around from there and clearly see the top of the ridge that I was walking to. Once the woods fell silent, I became aware acute senses kept me alert of everything going on. I continued my pace, keeping my hand on my gun. I made it probably about another 100 yards, maybe more when I started to hear movement off to my right. At first, it sounded like something moving around like a small animal, nothing to be concerned about immediately. But it went from rustling to a thrashing sound as if something big was throwing itself all around in the brush, and keep in mind, this was May. So everything was freshly lush and grown back from winter time. I kept my focus on the right of me, but still continuing my pace. Not exactly sure what was going on, thinking perhaps a mountain lion was about to pounce on me, but I wasn't exactly sure. Then I make it about another 60 yards and up the trail for me, probably about another 50 to 100 yards. Only about another 100 yards up from the top of the ridge. If that is not confusing, a canine suddenly jumps up onto its hind legs, out onto the trail. The trail, incidentally, is a game trail that has seen a lot of use in the past. However, it is fairly overgrown and worn out, leaving just sufficient room for me to travel through without thick, unruly brush obstructing my path. I would estimate that there was approximately 2 feet of total clearance on both sides of me. And right as this thing jumps out, I'm already focusing on the sounds on my right. I'm also looking forward, striving to stay highly vigilant and attuned to everything around me. When this thing leaps out before me, it stares directly at me. That's what caused me to halt abruptly. At this point, my hand was already on my gun, and I knew instinctively just from being out in the woods enough that this was not a natural creature, and this thing meant danger. Nothing can replicate the look that it gave me. It was in no way a look of imminent surprise. It was a look as if it was telling me, "You should not be here, and now I am going to make you pay." This thing probably stopped and stared at me for 1 minute. I don't even know if it was able to size me up in that time, but it instantly began transitioning into a runner's stance like a runner does and begins jogging toward me on 2 legs, arms outstretched and mouth open. As if it's aiming to grab me, I don't even hesitate instantly. I pull out my weapon and start shooting. It probably makes it within, I want to say 20 to 30 yards for me, after I've already fired several rounds, and jumps off into the left side of me, running 90 degrees for me. Now, this thing is running like a bulldozer through the woods, screaming, the loudest horrific noise I've ever heard, and is going perpendicular away from me in the woods. Meanwhile, there's also noise still on my right. That's getting louder and louder. And after several more seconds pass by, and the screaming of that thing that I shot becomes more and more faint, the sounds around me started to amplify. That's when I started to hear heavy thrashing, not only from my right, but also from my 5 o'clock, my 2 o'clock, and my 7 o'clock positions, all seeming like they are approaching nearer and nearer to me. Now I genuinely experienced that sensation of imminent danger and that I needed to evacuate that place immediately if I wished to survive. So very calmly I turned around, while also keeping my eyes around me 360 degrees. I quickly made my way back down the trail, the several 100 yards I'd already walked, ensuring to keep pace and keep track of everything around me. The noise and the thrashing persisted and followed me all the way down to the end of the game trail, where it connects to the old logging road. As I was roughly within 50 yards of the logging road and only another 20 from the truck, I began to hear that screaming sound coming back, heading right towards me from the diagonal angle in the woods. I assumed it to be the same dog-like two-legged creature that I had shot at just moments before. It sounded like it was upset, and it was making its way down the slope on a diagonal, advancing towards me and the truck. I realized at this point I had to hurry, or there would be none of me remaining. I was clueless about what I was dealing with. This is some advanced, unknown large predator. I made it back into my truck, flew in, pulled the car in gear, and drove out of there faster than I could have. I probably drove extremely quickly. I think I almost bent my axle driving over some of the rocks on the old dilapidated logging road. I mean, after all, there were numerous rocks that you had to be careful with. There were points where I could hear the rocks grinding against my front axle, and I was just praying to God that it did not do any damage to my truck. Luckily, I made it down the logging road and back to one of the more main roads. I cannot tell you if the noises ceased once I got in my truck. I didn't have my windows rolled down and I was not looking back. I did not want to risk that thing bursting out of the woods, coming to pull me out of my truck and take me away. But if that's what it was doing, it had missed me by a very short amount. As far as the other noises that were going crazy in the woods near me, I am not sure. As soon as this creature was shot and ran off, the other 3 or 4 that were surrounding me began to move in. Had I stood there a moment longer, or decided to continue towards the ridgeline I was initially heading towards, I believe they would have ambushed me, tearing me apart. Judging from its appearance, this creature looked unmistakably like a hybrid of a man and a wolf. It seemed at ease walking on 2 legs and had large appendages that resembled hands. At the end of each finger was a long black claw. If I had to guess, the size would be anywhere between 6 to 8 inches in length. They were quite thick. The hands looked similar to a raccoon's hand, and there was a large patch of fur on the chest. Despite the presence of creatures or the creature I observed, there was long fur covering its entire body. The head boasted an enormous mane, similar to a lion, except it looked more like a wolf. And the eyes and the face were very much like an animal, except around the eyes and the brow ridge, which were more human-like. But the few things that really stand out to me as truly disturbing besides its facial expressions and its sheer intelligence, power, and speed were its teeth and its eyes. As soon as it opened its mouth and moved towards me, this creature had a number of teeth that was unnatural and unlike any predator should have. Its eyes appeared to be a very soft orange that did not glow or give off any light. But they had such a fierceness to them that was almost striking just from looking at them. I have a cousin who is a very, very good illustrator, and I have thought many times about sitting down with him and having him illustrate what I saw that day. I am sure he could bring it to life just going by my descriptions, since the image of this thing will forever be burned in my mind.